It is great to have back on the program Benjamin Dixon, host of the Benjamin Dixon Morning Show, who is up to some very important work, I will say, which we're going to talk about. Ben, always great having you on.
David, it's a pleasure. Thanks so much for having me.
So Christian nationalism, sometimes there's this shorthand when people say, well, what does Christian nationalism mean? And you can imagine a spectrum where on one side you have separation of church and state, where whatever one's religion is, it has nothing to do with civil government. The shorthand that sometimes is used is, well, the opposite side of that spectrum is, for example, Marjorie Taylor Greene, who says, no, her Christianity should be exactly what dictates and determines how civil government should operate. Is that the right way to think about this movement?
Absolutely. I think Marjorie Taylor Greene inadvertently gave us the perfect lens through which we need to understand this threat that's coming from, I would like to say, my colleagues in the Christian faith, but there is a sect of Christians who believe that their specific brand of Christianity should be what dominates the entirety of society. And clearly that's a threat not only to those who choose not to believe or have any other belief, but it's a threat to those of us Christians who simply do not believe in the sectarianism and the tribalism of Christian nationalism.
Has something materially changed since, like, I remember in the early days of my show, there would be the televangelists and you would see a little bit of an inkling of this Christian nationalism, but you didn't see as much over, you can't be Christian and vote for a Democrat. Preaching politics from the pulpit. Was it there but less overt, or has something actually changed?
Well, it certainly has been there the entire time. There's always been a faction of the Christian religion that believes in dominionism, and through dominionism is quite literally the best way to describe it. They believe that they have the authority to dominate society. Some of them even go as far as believing that they should do what they can to expedite the apocalypse, so to speak. That trend has always been there, but what kind of control they had inside of the Republican Party, that was a different question. And we saw back when I got started, I got started around the Jeremiah Wright time, there was this belief in the Republican Party that they could capitalize on the evangelical vote without having to subscribe or bow down to the more zealotous form of white evangelicalism, to be specific. And we see now that after years and years and years of getting the votes of these particular types of evangelicals, that group has taken control of the Republican Party.
You mentioned white evangelicals. Can you talk a little bit about the kind of racial breakdown of these movements? Because we've known for a while that, for example, in the Prop 8 era in California, there certainly are conservative religious values in black churches.
That's right.
But is there a difference in terms of the political application as it comes to Christian nationalism between some of these different groups of churches?
Absolutely. I harken back to the statement from Malcolm X that 11 o'clock on Sunday mornings is the most segregated time in America. And that's because there's a fundamental difference between black Christianity and white evangelicalism. Not so much in terms of our belief in Jesus. That fundamental belief in Jesus is the same. But you have to take into context, when black people were praying for deliverance from Jim Crow, praying for deliverance from slavery, we were literally asking God to deliver us from white evangelicals who would lynch us on Sunday morning and then go to Sunday school. So the difference really lies in the value of human life in terms of black people, the willingness to decapitate the entire message of justice. You think about the Thomas Jefferson Bible, where they completely erased any semblance of justice and the narratives of setting free the captive. They took that out of the Bible and gave that to the slave, the enslaved person, because they fundamentally understood that messaging would galvanize a black liberation movement, which inevitably happened anyway.
I got a call, I think it was last week or the week before, from a self-described white progressive Christian. And this guy described his views about a number of different issues. And they were pretty conservative views, but what made him a progressive was he doesn't think any of those opinions should have any bearing on what government does. So that's an interesting thing, because sometimes it's not about, I don't know, you tell me, when we talk about the progressive Christian movement, is it still conservative, but it says that conservatism should be completely separate from how folks vote, or what is it exactly?
Yeah, there's a wide range of beliefs in Christianity. I mean, in terms of like, so if we just talk about social issues, there's a large group of Christians who fundamentally, and they use theology to support LGBTQ rights. So there is a broad range, but even in the progressive circles that hold on to conservative beliefs, like you mentioned, the Black community is extremely conservative on a lot of issues. But where we draw the line fundamentally is we don't believe that our beliefs should be used to discriminate against anyone else. Whereas Marjorie Taylor Greene not only believes that those beliefs should be used to discriminate, they believe that it should be the fundamental tool by which we organize society. They don't believe in democracy anymore. They fundamentally believe in a theocratic fascist state. And when we talk about the particular theology, it is a white supremacist Christian nationalist theology.
Hey, when it comes to like the future of Christianity in the context of Christian nationalism, I think I've seen you either say, or I read in some of the info you sent me, that you see Christian nationalism as a threat to Christians and Christianity as you describe yourself as a part of that movement. Can you explain that?
No, absolutely. In the clip that's going viral now, there's a particular white evangelical pastor who was disgusted with the fact that Black people call ourselves Christian. And the reason for that disgust is because he hated the fact that we fight for justice, we fight for liberation, we fight for democracy, we fight for things that he feels is anathema to his particular belief. So there's a clear divide, in not only a divide, but we are not safe. You have to understand, and anyone, I mean, I'm sure everyone can contextualize it for history. Like this type of nationalism, this type of Christian nationalism was the justification for slavery. It's now being used as a justification for the bigotry that we're seeing on every front. So I don't think Black Christians are safe at all. I think we are going to be targeted just as much as, let's say, the LGBTQIA community.
It's been interesting, I guess interesting, I don't know, there's probably a different term for it, but it's been notable that Christian nationalism has grown arguably as much as at any time in the last couple of decades during the presidency of a guy who clearly was lying about his religiosity. Like, it's very, very obvious that Trump was never religious. Trump was never against abortion. He kind of contrived all these things in the run up to being the Republican nominee because Democrats weren't going to make him the nominee. Do you know what? I mean, I don't even know how to ask the question. Like, what do you make of that? Because you would think that you would not necessarily see the growth of this movement while they are simultaneously pledging loyalty to a guy who is obviously not religious.
Yeah, it's a really acute case of special pleading. They are willing to ignore everything about Donald Trump because they felt like he was the vessel that could accomplish their agenda. And in so many ways, he has, right? With all the conservative appointments to the Supreme Court and through the entire judiciary, now with the rollback of Roe versus Wade, he has been a vessel to accomplish their ends. They did not care whether or not he was more like Satan or Jesus. That was completely immaterial to them. And I think we saw that happen in that election. And it's also, the last thing I'll say about it is that these Christian nationalists, you will notice that they don't use the language of Jesus. They use the language of traditional values. And they get to define those traditional values. So I would argue that it's not only the result of them wanting to use Donald Trump. I believe they have the same level of faith as Donald Trump. They're in the realm of heresy based on their own Bible. They are looking at Donald Trump as the second coming of Christ. There's a book out now that literally calls Trump the second coming of Christ.
I saw that.
It's a political opportunism, and they want power just as much as anything else. They want political power and economic power.
When folks talk about how to fight against this movement, one of the first things that's mentioned is, hey, if you're doing any kind of politics as a church, you should lose your tax exempt status. And there's this feeling among some that the best way to fight this is essentially a financial fight, demand investigations into the nonprofit status of some of these churches and get them maybe, I guess, to lose that status, even though it very rarely happens. There's some hope that if the IRS does kind of scale up operations a little bit, maybe this is something that they would look at, although it doesn't really seem like a priority. Do you think that that's an important and viable way of fighting this, or do you think there are other better ways?
Well, Actually, I don't think it is, not because I disagree with the tactic. I do agree that if you are going to use tax exempt dollars
Yep.
to accomplish political ends, you should lose your 501c3 status. That's what the law says.
Sure.
However, there's nothing that you can give a Christian more than a victim narrative. If you can give them a narrative, oh, we're under attack by the IRS, their donations are going to go up. So I don't think it's an effective strategy. I think the more effective strategy is to really extrapolate a little bit higher, because despite what any Christian believes in their individual dogma, if they are if they consider themselves to be a person of good faith, then they understand that we're going to have to coexist. And I know that word has gotten a little kind of kumbaya-ish, but the fact of the matter is that there is an alliance that has to be made between people of good faith, whatever they believe. So the IRS technique is, I don't know if they want to go after that. That's fine. I think that gives Christians, nationalists, more tools to complain about.
So, what are some of the other ways that individuals, whether they are or aren't religious, can get involved in pushing back against this?
Well, one, you could just call them out on their own frame, right? If I think a lot of times some of my friends in the atheist or agnostic community, they would rather challenge the frame and dismiss the possibility of God. My suggestion is call them out on their own BS, right? There's nothing about Christian nationalism that's remotely like Jesus based on the Bible, right? There's nothing. It's like Gandhi said, though he was a bit of a racist, he had this right. He said that I like your Christ, just not your Christians. And there's no part of what is being pushed by the Christian nationalists that's even remotely kind or just or reflects the image of Christ. And even if they don't like the image of Christ, I'm not talking about our allies in the atheist community, they're just not good people. I think we can attack them on their own frame because they can't even stand up to their own test.
Last thing I want to talk about, we saw the Supreme Court overturn Roe v. Wade. It was very obvious when that happened. Like, after your biggest victory, you don't stop. So right. You know, you're going to keep going. Now, Lindsey Graham has proposed an outright federal ban on abortion. We don't know if gay marriage might be coming next. You know, very far down, there's this idea of interracial marriage, although I don't think it's a priority. Oh, Ben, did I just lose you? Oh, we might have lost Ben. Let's see if we can get Ben back. Oh, no. Let's see if we can get Ben back. What did this? We were getting right to the crescendo of the interview. Let's see if we can get him back here. Oh, my. Would be really a shame if I wasn't able to get this question in. Something must have happened to his internet tubes. Oh, boy. Well, listen, we were coming to the end of our time. My question to Ben was going to be, do you expect to see the churches, the right-wing churches, get even more extreme now that they sort of won in a way on overturning Roe v. Wade? Are they just going to be pushing for more and more extreme things? But we'll have to save it for next time. Benjamin Dixon has been joining us until we lost him, host of the Benjamin Dixon Morning Show. We will link to all of his stuff. He's doing great work fighting Christian nationalism, and we will take a quick break and be back right after this.